The taxi screeched to a stop just short of the gravel driveway. I hadn't seen this place in over a year. Yet the moment I stepped out, boots still tainted with Afghan dust, my uniform crisp with pride, I was ready for the one thing I'd been dreaming about for the last 11 months, home. I was here early, hoping to surprise my mom, hoping to sink into my own bed for the first time since I left. But instead of the familiar sight of my cozy white cottage with its green shutters and the porch swing that swayed in the breeze, I found a dog park. A cacophony of barking, chaos. A dog park. 2 Labradors darted across the space where my living room used to be, chasing a tennis ball. A woman, dressed in leggings, shot me a glare as she yanked her spaniel away from my duffel bag, as though my mere presence had offended her. For a moment, I thought I'd gotten the wrong address. But then I saw it, the oak tree, the very one I'd carved my initials into before deploying, its scarred trunk standing defiantly in what should have been my yard. Except it wasn't my yard anymore. A sign hung on the fence, Cedar Grove Community Park, sponsored by the Homeowners Association. Beneath it, a plaque extolled harmony and shared joy. I felt my heartbeat thump in my chest, louder than the rumbling of mortar fire. I approached a jogger, unable to wrap my head around what I was seeing, and asked what had happened to my house. He shrugged without a care and mumbled, "Some deadbeat didn't pay taxes, so the HOA repurposed the land." He jogged off without a second thought, oblivious of the fact that I was a so-called deadbeat. A cold sense of disbelief washed over me, mingled with a weariness that settled deep in my bones. I'd survived ambushes, led night patrols, pulled children from burning huts, and now, the enemy wasn't some faceless threat on foreign soil. It was here. It was athleisure-clad, clipboard-wielding, and thoroughly unsympathetic. I spent hours running between city offices, each clerk more clueless than the last. Property records claimed I'd lost my land 6 months ago, due to tax delinquency, but I'd filed for a military tax exemption before I left. One disinterested clerk barely looked up from her screen and suggested I talk to the HOA's president, Susan Whitaker. Apparently, she was very committed to maintaining neighborhood standards. I found her in the community clubhouse, perched on a chair like a queen on a throne of self-appointed accolades. Behind her, a framed photo labeled Visionary Leader hung proudly. She was in the middle of berating a kid for putting up a basketball hoop when I walked in. I cleared my throat and introduced myself as the owner of 214 Pine Lane. Her eyes flicked up, and a smug smirk twisted her lips as she flipped through a folder. "That lot is delinquent, unclaimed, and reassigned to the HOA per protocol," she said, barely sparing me a glance. When I mentioned my active duty status and federal exemption, she cut me off, her words sharp. "Maybe you should have considered your obligations before running off to play soldier." The room went quiet. Her words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating any trace of civility. I reminded her of federal law, which protect deployed service members from losing their property. But she wasn't interested in that. With a dismissive wave, she told me she could offer me a lot by the trash compactor, cooing, "We can work something out, honey." I left, her smirk still burning in my mind. That night, I checked into a motel. My body was home, but my mind was still in the war zone. This wasn't Afghanistan. This was my home, my land, and the fight was no less real. The battlefront wasn't miles away. It was right here on my soil, against people I bled to protect. The next morning, I called Javier Morales, a buddy from my unit who now worked in cyber operations for a federal agency. I'd saved his life in a firefight. He owed me within hours. Javier unearthed a web of forged deeds, backdated HOA minutes, and land deals tied to Susan's brother-in-law. The HOA had fabricated a paper trail, claiming my land was abandoned. Javier found emails where Susan bragged about flipping that grunt's lot and making sure the neighborhood stayed soldier-free. One message even joked, "I'd salute and slink off if I ever returned." Rage simmered inside me, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that sharpens focus. A lawsuit would take years, and Susan had lawyers on speed dial. I needed something sharper, something louder, something undeniable. That's when I remembered Colonel Marcus Reed. He'd told me to call if I ever needed help back home. When I explained how the HOA had stolen my home while I was deployed, his voice turned steely. Send me the coordinates and a list of their assets. Quiet or loud? Loud, I replied. The plan took shape quickly. I didn't want an apology or a check. I wanted the HOA to feel what it was like to have their world turned upside down. Javier spent nights digging, compiling evidence thick enough to choke a bureaucrat. He uncovered records of the HOA claiming adverse possession, forging my signature, and selling my land to a shell company run by Susan's family. Satellite images showed illegal expansions, fences, sidewalks, even a clubhouse built on protected wetlands. Susan's emails mock veterans as troublemakers and refer to my house as a shack. I pinned one email to the motel wall next to a picture of my porch, where Mom used to sip iced tea in her rocking chair. I wondered if they'd burned it down or dumped it. Either way, they'd stolen more than land. They'd stolen memories. I took the evidence to Judge Clara Hensley at the courthouse, a former JAG officer. She knew my unit and despised civilian scams against soldiers. I laid out Javier's findings, forged documents, zoning violations, emails. She called it a criminal masterpiece, but warned me that despite the proof, the HOA's money and connections could stall a lawsuit for years. When I asked about federal seizure for investigation, her eyes gleamed. If it's tied to public service abuse or security, she said, it's possible. I left the courthouse and called Colonel Reed. He proposed a military training exercise on disputed land, framed as urban conflict readiness. Within a day, he secured approval for Operation Homefront, a weekend-long exercise led by the 212th Tactical Battalion. My lot and the surrounding HOA properties would become a simulation zone. It was audacious. It was legal. And most of all, it was perfect. Susan had no idea what was coming. Her next meeting? It would be crashed by Humvees. I meticulously mapped out every illicit structure, the dog park, the clubhouse, even Susan's prized rose garden. I scouted military logistics, planned vehicle routes, and marked landing zones. 3 days later, everything was in place. I spent my final night in the motel, staring at old photos of my house, the memories flooding in. I remembered Mom's laughter as we painted the shutters together. That land wasn't just dirt to me. It was my roots, and they tried to rip it out. But now, I was rewriting the story. At dawn, Willow Ridge was awakened by the roar of diesel engines. Humvees rumbled past manicured lawns. Soldiers staked tents in the dog park, and a Black Hawk helicopter buzzed the meditation garden. Residents, still in their pajamas, gawked, clutching mugs. And then, Susan stormed out in a satin robe, holding a coffee cup that read, Cedar Grove's finest. Her jaw dropped when she saw engineers converting her precious clubhouse into a military command post. She charged toward an officer, waving her mug like a scepter, but he handed her a packet, federal orders for land investigation and temporary occupation. Her face turned a deep shade of red, and she screamed about sovereignty, but no one cared. I pulled up in an unmarked SUV and watched as Susan spotted me. Her eyes narrowed. You did this? She hissed, storming over. I nodded. That land you stole? It's mine again, inch by inch. She sputtered, clinging to HOA rights, but I asked when she last checked her property lines. Her face froze. Soldiers began cordoning off her clubhouse, the pool, and her garden, all built on stolen or unpermitted land. Susan tried to lock herself inside the clubhouse, but the county had provided the keys. Her wine fridge became a makeshift cooler for MREs. Her living room? A new map room for operations. The residents were in chaos. Some waved pizza boxes as makeshift protest signs. Others called news vans, and a few tried to challenge the soldiers. But when shown their own zoning violations, they backed off. An elderly couple, their faces weathered with time, brought me coffee. They confessed they despised Susan's fines for years and offered to testify. I thanked them, feeling the tide turn. By noon, the media had arrived in full force. Susan's press conference was a disaster. Cameras captured the military tape surrounding her precious sign. She ranted about government overreach, but cracked when asked why a veteran's home had been demolished. Her meltdown went viral that evening, with hashtags like hashtag Justice for Ejir Ramirez and hashtag Susan Sinks spreading like wildfire. Meanwhile, Javier traced 5 more fraudulent land deals within the HOA, and Susan's brother-in-law was under IRS investigation. A new red sign went up. Federal training ground. Restricted access. Susan's empire? Occupied. Her petunias trampled by boots. Cedar Grove had turned into a fortress. Soldiers drilled past stunned residents. Drones mapped the land, and Susan's kitchen was now hosting briefings. Checkpoints blocked her allies inside the command post. I sat with a DOD officer, confirming my ownership of the land and the HOA's crimes. They had bulldozed my house without permits, paid for with Susan's accounts. Outside, Susan tried rallying her board with a megaphone, but the neighbors booed her mercilessly. An officer slapped a federal audit notice on her table, effectively dissolving the HOA. The cheers erupted as reporters mobbed Susan, demanding answers. She babbled legal jargon, but the narrative had already been set. She was a villain. I was the avenger. Javier sent the knockout blow. Leaked footage of Susan mocking soldiers, laughing about my house's destruction, and bragging about untouchable fraud. I sent to the press with one simple line. I'm home. It exploded online, sparking calls for her arrest and widespread veteran support. The VA condemned Susan, and civil rights groups rallied to offer legal aid. Susan's allies fled. Her brother-in-law was subpoenaed, and her contractor turned on her. 11 homes, including hers, received relocation notices. Residents scrambled, some packing, others crying. Susan's house became the epicenter of federal review. Her files exposed years of embezzlement and shredded complaints. At dusk, I stood where my living room had once been. Soldiers had marked the foundation, clearing the area to rebuild. I thanked them. Their salutes were heavy with shared stories of betrayal. Judge Hensley had dissolved the HOA permanently, stripping Susan of her title. She was finished. Her power, her legacy, reduced to ash. That night, I slept soundly, knowing justice was close. Weeks later, the rebuilding began. The VA and donations funded it, aiming to restore my home exactly as it had been. Neighbors brought food, contractors, and apologies for their past silence. Susan? She fled town, her car packed with boxes. Her name was erased from Cedar Grove. And Cedar Grove? It healed. Kids played freely, yards bloomed chaotically, and a new civic group formed, a group led by the Ramirezes, focused on protecting soldiers. I drove the first nail into the porch frame, where Mom's swing would hang. The sound of the hammer striking the nail wasn't destruction. It was creation. They had stolen my home while I fought for theirs. But now I had returned. I reclaimed it, and I dismantled their world, one nail, one truth, one soldier at a time.